everybody needs an advocate.
Because I'm not there 24/7.
Families that have hemophilia mature faster.
I've been feeling a lot of anxiety lately.
I'm so tired of being strong.
To understand how far we've come helps you appreciate where we are now.
No is just no for this person. Somebody's going to say yes sooner or later.
And it helps you understand that there are more steps to be taken in the future.
You're the first person I've met with a bleeding disorder.
Let's fight the disease and not the people who have it.
One of the first areas that I'll start chatting with them about is diagnosis. When did the diagnosis come? Was there a family history? Were you looking for it? You and your family have a particularly interesting diagnosis story. There was no family history, but then it wasn't just one child being diagnosed, it was two in very short order. Can you take us through your diagnosis story?
So my youngest is Tanner. He's 16 and he has severe hemophilia. When I was pregnant with him, my 5-year-old was starting to have some issues, strength and muscle issues. So we started taking him to the doctor and trying to figure out what was going on with him. And the doctors kept saying, "Now, how pregnant are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm 8.5 months pregnant." And they said, "Wait to take him to the doctor until after you have your baby." So it kind of set up a little red flag. So skip forward a month. So I had Tanner. 2 days later, he was diagnosed with severe hemophilia. The night before, he had slept on my chest, and when I woke up, I was covered in blood. So I had not heard of hemophilia. I didn't know anything about it, and there was no family history. 2 weeks later, we took my son, my 5-year-old, back to the doctor, and he was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So I'm not sure if anybody knows what that is.
Probably worth explaining, yeah.
It is a life-threatening muscle-wasting disease. It is the most severe of all of the neuromuscular diseases that fall under the MDA umbrella. So while we're dealing with hemophilia and Tanner needing a blood transfusion at day 2, then we had to deal with that diagnosis as well.
And you had no family history of hemophilia, you had no reason to expect muscular dystrophy in the
Duchenne
family.
or muscular dystrophy, no.
So, and worth mentioning as well that you had a daughter who's, so today, Sydney, 24?
So Sydney's 24. My son Tyler with muscular dystrophy is 22. And when he was diagnosed, we were told he would not live past his teens. And then Tanner is 16.
So at the time, it's a newborn baby with hemophilia, a 5-year-old who was just diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, and you still have a young child.
She was 7.
Who's 7 years old. So,
Correct.
I mean, did your husband and you just stare at each other thinking, where's the book for this one?
Yes. Everyone kept saying, well, statistics are statistics. So we don't let people say what statistics are anymore because we kind of blew that out of the water. Yeah, we just realized that even though all of this was out of our control, we realized that we couldn't crash, we couldn't give up, and we couldn't quit. So we had a great doctor that, with the hemophilia, that kind of guided us through what it is and what to expect and the treatments. So we knew in the back of our mind that one was easy. That was the easy disease because there is a treatment for it. And there's so much known about it. Whereas with the muscular dystrophy, there is no treatment, there is no cure, and you just kind of go through life and change how you live as they progress.
And fortunately for Tanner, he doesn't have an inhibitor, he didn't have that challenge. So in terms of hemophilia being truly in a controlled place for the family, that was at least one sigh of relief, I suppose.
Absolutely.
That we're within a controlled situation with regard to the hemophilia.
Yes.
Now, with regard to the Duchenne's, as the years went by, did you find that there were more frequent challenges, unexpected curveballs in what it took to treat and manage?
No, because there's nothing really to do for the Duchenne. You wait until they start to lose weakness to go into a stroller, and then a scooter, and then a wheelchair. It was more the unexpected with the hemophilia. But we just always knew in our mind it was just doable. You just pay attention, you learn as you go, and you just handle things as they happen.
You had said something interesting to me on our call about how, we're not a family that sits back and wallows. Our attitude is like, grab the factor and we're going to go. Was that from day one? Did it take a while? From day one, we had an attitude of, and you had shared with me, maybe there's a clock that's ticking a little quicker. We have a lot to pack in. Can you kind of speak a bit more to that philosophy?
We just knew we weren't going to sit at home and just sit on the couch and, have Tanner read a book with a helmet and knee pads on. We were going to live life. And if he got a bleed, we would treat it and go on, or we would, rest for a couple hours and ice it and go on. but we were not going to stop anything that we did for the hemophilia or the muscular dystrophy.
And you had mentioned earlier you felt very fortunate with the doctor and the care that you had for hemophilia. That's also such an important part of that onboarding experience. Is what care team are you around at the beginning to help you understand what your options are, help you understand what an individualized care plan is, what rhyme and rhythm is going to work best for your child and your family. Were there any particular takeaways, tips, or for any newly diagnosed families, things that they might want to be on the lookout for when thinking about their care team and their physicians?
I think you have to find a doctor that fits with your life. If you have a doctor that's saying, okay, sit at home and don't let them do anything, have them, do anything, nothing dangerous, if that's not who you are, find somebody that fits in with who you are. Our doctor really wanted Tanner to grow up and be normal. He didn't want him sitting at home because then you create a whole nother issue. Then you create a psychological issue of a child who's really not normal and they also have hemophilia. Our doctor encouraged us to set limits. Our family's very athletic and our son is very athletic. Let him play sports, just don't let it be football or hockey. If he wants to play baseball, and this one shocked me, do you guys know what position they recommended he play? Catcher. I was floored.
Have other people gotten that recommendation? There's a lot of fast answers to that. Okay. Interesting, because it's so good for your knees? What? Because you're under all the equipment? The padding. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's fair.
So, of course, my son wanted to pitch, which was the number one position he didn't want him to play. But, pick a sport. Pick, if they want to play soccer, take your factor with you. Maybe not play goalie. Maybe not tackle as much. Take down other players. But they can do what they want to do. You just might have to set a little bit of limits.
And I do want to acknowledge, too, we mentioned, your daughter Sydney growing up. And with two boys, each of whom have chronic challenges, very different, but there's only so much bandwidth, there's only so much energy. And that is something that comes up over and over again in a household where there's a chronic disease. If one of the children doesn't have it, making sure that or just in general, how do you balance having time for all your children? Like, that's probably really hard. I'm not a parent, probably really hard to begin with. But then when there's two who need specific kinds of attention and amounts of attention, balancing what you do for that third must be tricky. Tell us about that.
In our experience, no, it wasn't tricky for us. I think a lot of it has to do with her and her personality. You can either, when you're in a situation like that, you can go two ways. You can follow the good path, or you can get off path and do bad things. And thank God, she followed the good path, and she saw the nurturing and the love and the good things that we could still do with our family, and now she's finishing up nursing school. So it impacted her in the most positive way ever. And I always say, I hate Duchenne, I hate hemophilia, but I love who we are as a family because of it. When Tanner was 5, he had, or 6, he had a recurring hip bleed. We thought it was in his hip joint and ended up being in the hip flexor. But so he got his first port at 5. I think 4 or 5 years later, we got another one put in. And around 13, he decided, he was being teased, of course, because of going swimming and taking his shirt off. He wanted to get rid of the port. And so we went into the doctor's office, and he said, you can get your port out. My only requirement is you have to self-infuse. It's a safety issue. That way, if he's somewhere where I'm not, he can infuse. So he went home that day. I had to take my other son somewhere, and Tanner FaceTimed me, and he had self-infused.
Incentive is a marvelous thing.
Incentive is huge. I called the next day, made the appointment, and the port was out, and he has self-infused every day, every other day since then. I don't even know that he has infused unless I see the trash on the kitchen table, or he'll leave the sticker for me to put on the calendar. So That's
his form of communicating with you.
It is.
That's letting you know he did it. Look, my junk.
It's so empowering to let them be a huge part of their care. And he knows if he misses an infusion, he could get injured at soccer practice. He plays very competitive soccer. So he knows he is in control of his health.
Well, and I tell this story a lot, but unfortunately my younger brother with severe hemophilia passed away from a head bleed while he was in college, in part because he had fallen off his regimen. and he was not infusing prophylactically as he had been his whole life. In his freshman year, sustained a mild head injury, went to bed and didn't wake up. And so that safety issue is a real issue. But to know that you are empowered to live your best self and to provide yourself the opportunity to live your best self through self-infusing, it's a major moment. And for both my brother and I were late to self-infuse. I think that was a big part of it. And I think finding those moments in those earlier teenage years before someone's looking at colleges and is out the door, making sure that habits are built that will serve them well for the rest of their life.
Absolutely.
So round of applause for Kim for sharing so openly. Thank you, Kim. And we will now invite up to join us, also from California, Chelsea London Lloyd. Chelsea, welcome.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
So Chelsea, you are, as I just mentioned, also from California, originally from San Francisco.
Yes.
And what is it that you're doing today? Give people a sense of what you're doing with these talents.
I consider myself an activist. I do traditional comedy and acting in film and television, but also as an activist, I'm very vocal about growing up with having sick parents. So my blog is Daughters of Sick Parents, and there's a lot of advocacy done around that, which I'm sure we'll go further into.
So when you were 4, I think, is that right? When you were 4, your dad started presenting some symptoms, and then there was also a diagnosis story worth telling.
Yeah, when I was 4, my sister was 2. My dad, started dropping plates and falling down the stairs, and they didn't know why. And it took a couple years to diagnose that he had Lou Gehrig's disease, also referred to as ALS.
What are your first memories of learning that you shared with me that you were having conversations about life and death and thinking about mortality at a younger age than maybe one would expect? Yes. When do you remember first having these kind of conversations with your dad?
Pretty much some of my earliest memories as a human being are thinking about what it means to die, which I know sounds dark, but there's a positive outcome from this. But just because I saw the way that he was physically changing slowly over time, and he actually had it for 15 years, which is really on the longer end. A lot of people with ALS, it's like 2 years. But I was always told, this is the last birthday with dad. This is the last Christmas with dad. This is, I had to say goodbye to him many times. And then fortunately, he kept surviving from these rare surgeries and things like that.
But that's got to also be so strange. Like to keep,
really
that's
strange.
Like in addition to he's sick and eventually something will take him to not know where the goalposts are.
It was definitely very confusing. And then, of course, on the flip side, and there were some things that was like, oh, well, this surgery is a no-brainer and this one's fine. But then, something goes wrong. And then it was like, oh, don't see you for a few months because now you're in a new hospital dealing with that. So just very kind of weird things. But, everyone in this room has been through strange experiences with illness, and you learn from it and you learn how to deal with it and move forward.
Sure. What were some of the things that your dad shared with you that you still look back on, reflect on, or were kind of cornerstones of your growth?
Good question. He definitely shared with me the importance of living life to the fullest and just making sure that you are on a path that is not what you think you should be doing, but something that you're generally passionate about and living each day with a smile on your face. It sounds kind of general, but I really don't think I would have been pursuing creative arts as a profession necessarily. A lot of people do it as a hobby, which is great, but, he died when I was 19 after 15 years, and the last year of his life, he couldn't speak at all. So, he pointed at letters on a whiteboard to communicate what was going on. And also just throughout his life, he was sad a lot of time. There was times where he was really depressed, understandably, and my mom also had breast cancer. So, she was bald, and then he was in a wheelchair, and, I would just always ask, why do you guys look like this? What's the deal? But he taught me, cherish your life, because, he couldn't work anymore at a certain point, and that was really depressing for him, to not be able to provide for the family when the medical bills are really high, and, not having a purpose. He lived in a 24-hour care home my mom cared for him full time for 8 years. And then at that point she had cancer, and it's expensive and it was exhausting. And so he moved into a care home, and it was 45 minutes away. So I would see him as much as possible. But then high school's crazy, and sometimes I'd, only see him once a week. And that led to some other psychological stuff. And that's why I blog, because I was so confused. And, a lot of people of a certain generation didn't grow up in therapy, and my parents certainly didn't. And I always ask my mom, like, why didn't I have someone to talk to, or a mentor, a therapist? And she goes, well, you got good grades and you were happy, and I didn't, I don't know. But it really did affect me in a lot of ways, which I talk more about on the blog if anyone's interested. And just seeing, I was depressed for a long time.
Sure.
And so, and I saw how it affected my sister, who we mentioned on the phone, is really, really private. And
you had mentioned that was one of the hardest parts of the whole thing, was watching your sister and negotiating how you as the big sister, what that role is. Talk a little about that, because my brother and I both had hemophilia, and then our parents were divorced, and that was messy sometimes, and bouncing back and forth, and them trying to talk to each other through us. But that sibling, it's just the two of us. There's something there that no matter what video game problem we were having that day, whoever was mad at whom about cheating in the James Bond GoldenEye shooter game, that went out the door the moment there was a real life thing that we had to deal with, and we were in lockstep with each other on how we get through this together at 12 and 10. So I have some appreciation for that sibling connection in those tough circumstances. But tell us about your experience.
so she's a year and a half younger than me, so pretty close in age, but 2 grades apart. But we, for some reason, we really would butt heads. The illnesses really got to us. In some ways, my mom was like, why are you guys always fighting? And it's still something I'm trying to figure out, but because she was just really private and never wanted to talk about it. And I always wanted to talk about it. I'd be like, did you see Dad has a new wheelchair? Or, he has a new symptom, and, let's discuss. And she was like, I'm 7. I don't feel comfortable having this conversation.
Yeah. So and you had these chats with your dad about mortality from a very young age.
Yeah.
Did your sister?
No, because I don't know. It's not necessarily the most common thing for a child to be curious about, but
Right.
But so I see how it's affected her to this day. Very bright. He's going to Columbia Law School in the fall, but very private. And it's kind of her worst nightmare would to be connecting with other people about this. And my mom's pretty private too. And so they're always kind of keep your thoughts to yourself and speak when you're spoken to. So I became an actor and an activist,
Yeah, so
that's what happens.
Well for you. Yeah, you took that real to heart.
Yeah. So she's like, oh, okay, So I just like to provide a safe space for people online that reach out when their parent is dying or has recently died. And there's also a space for siblings who have died, and just, connecting them with other girls or chatting with me about what that process is like is, a nice little way to connect with others.
There's so much in what you just said. One of the things, though, I want to, just because my wife yesterday got her annual physical, and we have the same primary care physician. And she's there for an hour, and we love this doctor. She's fantastic, and she's at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, which is an excellent hospital system. But last night she goes, I'm realizing I was there for an hour. There wasn't one question about my mental health. My wife is very healthy. She's only now in her early 30s. She wore a hospital bracelet for the first time earlier this year, and was like, I've never had one of these on before. And I was like, are you? How are we married? But that's been her life experience. So she's very healthy. So when you say your mom said, well, you got good grades, you were talkative. I was talkative too, shocking, as a kid.
Here we are.
And I think because of that, there was also an assumption oh, he's doing great. He can tell jokes, he's talking a lot. And it's no, those are just also true. I'm also struggling with this other part of my life that isn't negated because I have a rounded out personality. But I think it's hard when we look for indicators in busy lives. We just completely miss important information with regard to somebody's total well-being. How did you, with a mother who had a philosophy of, or has a philosophy of, you kind of keep things a little closer to the chest, your sister has that as well. Doesn't sound like your dad necessarily had that. How do you think you had the courage to be as outspoken as you are and to take a swimming upstream path in the family?
Well, I think just since I knew that, theater originally was the way that I expressed myself. So I had sort of that going on, but I never had any awareness till I was older that, that's actually how I expressed myself because I was so upset about this illness. I didn't necessarily connect the two till later on. And so you process the death, right? Your dad dies, a couple years go by, and a lot of people just told me eventually it gets better and eventually it will be okay. And so, as anyone in here knows who's lost someone or has gone through something where someone has just been diagnosed, it's never something that goes away, but you do learn to deal with the pain in other ways. Then a few years after that, last year, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic. Again, it had come back after 17 years. So I kind of thought, I was good. I was in the clear. I processed, and now we move on. And then in her situation, she's not going to be in remission. Like, this is what she will have for the rest of her life. And it made me realize, like, wow, okay. I thought I was good. Now I have to deal with the second parent with, this terminal diagnosis. Knock on wood, 85% of people in her situation are less than 5 years. It's been almost 2, but who knows? Right. Maybe she'll live a long time. I know
somebody who has opinions on statistics sitting to your left.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Don't pay any attention.
Yeah. Don't pay any attention to them.
So I just thought, at this point, like, I need to do something about this. And I think it's common. Everyone kind of waits, maybe one day I'll start this movement or do this big thing. And I thought, one day when my career is farther along, I could really get into this.
Yeah, once people are really listening to me and my platform's big enough, or I have more time on my hands, or I'm somewhat otherwise not where I am today. There's always some reason that I can't start today, right?
But that's not true. And it was this realization, like, wow, I could wait 20 years till maybe more people, but no, in 20 years, I'll be a different age, a different place in my life. There's people going through this now, so.
Right. And you've referenced on our call, and we should I should bring David up in a moment to join us as well. But you referenced on our call at times literally one person who is out there that kept you motivated to keep blogging, keep up your work. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, when I first started, literally there was only one person that ever responded to any blog post. And that's not to say a lot of people read things, they don't respond. So you have no idea. But there was this one girl that was like, my mom is dying and I'm really upset. And, can you talk about this? And I just, for the longest time, I just did it for her. And I was like, well, she's, I want to help her. And so I think everyone who's thinking about starting something or doing something, there's no better time than right now, because just one person could benefit.
And as you said, of course, it's never just one person. There's a whole bunch of people that one person kind of represents. But yeah, when you have that, I can certainly appreciate when there's one person responding to a certain thing that we put out, or I'm like, yes, it was for you. Yes. It's always been for you.
Yes.
So my last question to you then, or I guess I want to give you the opportunity to speak about this, because when we had our call ahead of today, and I had asked you about, is there anything we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about? You just wanted to encourage that people get themselves checked. So do you want to have a moment? Give us your PSA.
Your PSA. Well, there's a double-edged sword here, because some people don't want to know, right, what's going on with them. But I do a monthly Feel It on the First post in the Instagram blog world about, getting self-breast check exams. My opinion on this is to do so that, if anything else, it's the first of the month you're reminding yourself what it means to be alive, what it means to be healthy, not taking that for granted. In terms of breast cancer, the BRCA gene, if you do find out that you have the BRCA gene, there's studies that say you have a 70 to 80% chance of getting breast cancer. And I think that's so interesting when I meet someone who does have an advanced form of cancer and they go, yeah, I had the BRCA gene. And I just go, oh, did you know? And it's kind of awkward to ask, but in my situation with the blog, I do. And I've met so many people that didn't know that they had a certain gene. And, you can get a double mastectomy, and that is going to decrease your chances. So I just like to remind people, especially in the younger adult category, you're not quite thinking about that yet, but you are old enough to start thinking about, you can get cancer. So I encourage people, just, if nothing else, first of the month, remind yourself what it means to be healthy and appreciate that. Or if you are going through an illness or death, then what can you do? What's one small action that you can take to, further your self-care or further your experiences with other people?
Especially if you are a woman living with von Willebrand disease, or a woman who has hemophilia, or if you have a pre-existing condition of some kind, as my hematologist used to tell me. That doesn't mean that, because I would I'd pass off pains in my lower body, like, oh, it's probably just hemophilia related, some arthritis or something. And she would always say, you can get anything. You're not just going to have hemophilia in your life. You are as vulnerable as any human being to getting anything. So don't be curious about your body and know what else is going on. And I've come to appreciate that as I get older. Challenges are going to be a little more complicated sometimes because I also have this other thing to contend with. So I think especially if there's a pre-existing condition underlying, being really proactive about preventative health. You do amazing work, and thank you very much for telling us about it. Round of applause for Chelsea, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, last and certainly not least, my new friend in cycling and wearing blue, David Clark. And who all was it? So it was you, your brother?
My brother and two cousins, and that's it.
And you and your brother had hemophilia. Mm-hmm. Your cousins?
Yes.
They did as well?
Yes.
Was that help? Did you know other kids growing up with hemophilia in the 60s?
Well, and when I remember, yeah, because my mom actually did the Mid-America Foundation chapter, and so I got to meet other hemophiliacs all the time.
Did you find that helpful? Or scary, or what was it like meeting other guys?
Be honest with you, it was irritating because most of the back then, especially, most of the kids were kept in a padded room. So you let them out, they just go absolutely crazy. Yeah.
And not to scare anybody, but like especially for anyone who may be newly diagnosed or new to this community, tell them like in the 60s, you have severe hemophilia. What's a family expecting? What is a family hearing from their doctor when they get that diagnosis?
I don't know how many times me and my brother both were told, you got a couple years left, over and over and over.
So you must also be quite a subscriber to statistics, huh?
No, not at all. Not at all. The reality is, back then, they didn't know how to treat us. They did some horrible things to us every chance they got, it seemed like. You only go to a learning hospital, therefore, after one person tortures you, another one comes in and tortures you, another one, and you wish it was a small class. But they kept us alive until the factor got better, and
In those pre-factor years, did you develop target joints or particular muscle areas or anything?
Muscles in the calves and biceps mostly. But no, we had factor. It was invented in 1963, so my brother and I were literally 5 miles from the hospital where they came up with it, so they tried it on him, and it worked.
Did they try it on you as well, or when did you start on factor?
I was 3 years later, so
okay.
He had been using it all that time. So
how old were you when you first started on factor?
3 days, 4 days.
Okay, so you don't have a pre-factor memory then?
No.
Gotcha.
No. And so I had two older brothers. One did not survive the forceps, and then they kind of figured out that he had hemophilia, and so they were a lot more gentle on my brother and me.
Got it. So that was how they learned that hemophilia was in the family?
Yep.
Man, do you ever talk to your parents about your older brother who you lost?
Not really. My mom was pretty distraught about it, so it wasn't a subject that she liked to deal with.
Yeah, no, that seems entirely fair. And you grew up here in Missouri?
Yes, northwest Missouri, Pony Express Wildlife Reserve, where you go out and do all kinds of damage to yourself.
And then you found yourself in Houston later in life. Can you tell us about what brought you down there?
Corpus Christi. It was warm. We had that summer here, and I think it was 92. There was never a sunny day the whole summer. I was like, I've had enough. I'm out of here.
We talk now about the challenges that young adults face and going after jobs, skill building so that they're not working in manual labor, knowing how to interact with an HR department and navigate disclosure and insurance issues, finance. There's a lot of considerations, but again, it's still a different time. So if we rewind a little bit, what else would you maybe have been thinking about that guys today might not be thinking about?
Where I was going to get my next shot. That was a big thing. There was no insurance, period. And as you know, it's quite expensive without the insurance. And we would beg, cheat, steal expired blood from each other, and got it from different corporations. Like Alpha was one of the ones that kept kept giving it to me when I was in my early 20s, which was an absolute godsend. You know, I was going to where I'd take a shot every 2 months because, you know, I only had 12 doses left for 2 years. So I did a lot of cheating, you know, when it comes to treatment.
When you get bleeds, primarily they're muscle bleeds?
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
At least it was. Now that I'm old, it's everywhere.
And when did you and your brother learn that you weren't only contending with hemophilia?
86, I think.
How did you learn?
One of the women at the hospital in Columbia ran our blood through to see, you know, did the Western blot, I believe, and found out that we both had been infected with HIV, and we already knew it though, because the batch that we had a batch that came through that we were using, and the got a recall on it because it was been infected from a gentleman out in California that decided he wanted to share the wealth. Yeah. So yeah, that was.
Your dad was affected by that as well. But so for anyone who doesn't know, 90% of people with severe hemophilia contracted HIV or hepatitis C through contaminated blood product in the 70s and 80s. And then 2 years after that, I believe, was when you lost your sister-in-law?
1990s when I lost her, and my brother died shortly thereafter, a year later. He also died from a head injury that turned into encephalitis. He was out riding his motorcycle, and the strip pits out by Columbia, and he was a maniac. I mean, an absolute maniac, and he jumped off of a hill that I couldn't ever do it. I never had that kind of guts. But he lost.
That might be why you're here, David.
Well, apparently a lot of people do it, and he had never made a mistake, but he did that day, and he headbutted a tree at 55, 60 miles an hour. He had developed a bleed in his gut, and it got septic, and they finally got that taken care of, and he had a slow bleed going on in his head the whole time that they did not catch, and then he passed away from that.
And was he always rebellious, risk taker, out there kind of guy?
Well, he assumed he was going to be dead by 20, and
right.
He just went nuts. If you said you can't do that, he did.
And then I can only imagine that the death of his wife turned the dial up on that mentality.
Yeah, it did.
What was that like for you?
Almost like a glimpse into my future. Losing him was the most difficult thing in my life. You lose your brother and your best friend all at once. Same time frame, I also lost my father, one of my cousins, and my mom shortly thereafter. So within 4 years, the whole family was gone.
So what pulled you through? I mean, what keeps you going during those times?
Life is rough. I mean, it just is. So there's no drug you can take to, change that fact. I mean, you can take drugs that make you so stoned that you don't care, but when you get done with it, it's still there, or if not even worse. So I just look at the future and think, when I was a child, I was like, I'm not dying until I get a jetpack, Now I want to be able to go out in outer space. I'm 52. And,
I was going to say, you're on your own for this one. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I was in the hospital for my birthday, so that was interesting.
Why is that?
I had a GI bleed that got out of control, and luckily the guys I was with knew I had hemophilia, so they called a 911, and they haloed me up to St. Louis and tried to put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
But from what you shared with me, it sounded like it was a pretty harrowing experience that you were right there.
Yeah, my children are still not speaking to one another because one of them wanted to pull the plug and the other one didn't. So,
actual story. This is a true story.
Well,
are they not speaking to each other?
No, they're not speaking to each other. They're so angry at each other that because she said, Dad told me that if I ever get hooked up to the machine, unplug me. I was like, Anna, give me a couple days,
Yeah. How have your kids helped you get through life? What have they provided for you that otherwise may not have? I don't want to put words in your mouth and say otherwise may not have made you able to find the strength. But I just imagine having them in your life has been a beacon during some of these particularly tough times, and I would like to hear you talk about that.
Both the kids they dealt with what I was dealing with very well. Their mother was very positive about it, so I tried to make sure they did not have anything to worry about. They went see me limping or with a sore arm. I was real good at hiding it from them so that they wouldn't constantly think about it and feel like their parents weren't normal. Besides that, they're two great kids. Got one that's if they're fighting now, who gets Dad? It's like.
I hope you're siding with the one who wanted you alive, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's safer.
But we spend some time on the phone talking a bit about exercise and the importance of exercise and being physically fit. And I was wondering if you could share some of those thoughts as well.
Well, when I was, I think 15, I started having a lot more bleeds in my joints. And about that time, I picked up a bicycle and started riding. Got to the point where I was riding 50 miles a day, 60 miles a day, and on the weekends, doing a century or two. The difference it made in my life is just unbelievable. During my 20s, when I was riding the most, I'd have a bleed once a year. Before it was, every 2 weeks or more, depending where I slammed my hand or anything like that. So the more active you are, the less likely you are to have a bleed. I mean, it's that simple. Granted, at my age, I have arthritis now, so the bike is a little bit more painful. Great way to think about things that you don't want to share with anybody else, that just got to be reflective. But mostly, I was thinking, that I'm going to do this so that I can live to be 50, 60 years old without being in a wheelchair. And I was lucky enough that it happened.
It's so important. It's so important.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, David. Round of applause for David as well. So one question that I want to start with here, and I'll start with you, Kim, actually, on this, and maybe we'll go down the line. You can each share your thoughts. But each of you is an advocate in one way, shape, or form, or several. What is one thing that you wish more advocates either did or thought about differently?
Yeah, I think allowing your child to make the decision to whether they should do something or not is big. It allows them to take ownership for the outcome. If there's something you don't think they should do, you could kind of negotiate with them. Well, okay, you can ride your skateboard, but you have to wear your helmet and your knee pads. And then it's up to them if it's something that they think it's worth risking an injury. And I think it empowers them. Empowering is huge with the body and hemophilia.
And what did you share with me that your son had recently come up to you, or once a month you said he comes up to you?
I would say at least once a month. So I'm on a lot of Facebook pages for hemophilia and for muscular dystrophy, but a lot of times if somebody asks a question, I'll screenshot it and send it to my son to kind of get his input on things or to show how other people do things differently. And I would say at least once a month he'll come up and give me a big hug and tell me, thank you for letting me live a normal life. To let me live my life and not sit in a bubble or sit on the couch or, to live his life and just work through things if anything comes up.
And I had shared with you that my mom, like you mentioned the word negotiating, similarly, hey, you know your situation. If you're going to go play back, she would say to me at a certain point, I had an inhibitor for a long time, was very heavy, was on the couch, was out of school. So when I got over the inhibitor, was on prophylaxis, had a synovectomy, I was like, okay, let's see what this thing can do. And so I started getting a little more active. And she would say to me, okay, well, I hope when you're walking around at 30 with a limp, you're like, I'm really glad I played basketball one day. And she would kind of give me the business a little bit, but I appreciated that. Like what in that was also I'm going to take care of myself. I'm self-infusing. I'll ice when I come home. And I'm going to own this choice. And I'm fine with the arthritis that I have from the activities that I did because I wouldn't give up that freedom and that sense of being a kid for anything at all.
I think the bottom line, it's about them feeling normal. They already feel different. They already know they're different. They're already thinking about hemophilia 24 hours a day. It's about them feeling normal and doing what other kids are doing.
And they're going to have to make tough choices throughout their life.
Whether they have hemophilia or not.
So you may as well, when they are able to start making those, teaching them what it means to make those decisions and to weigh risk, benefit, and all of that. If they have the information, if they have the right information. What's something for you, Chelsea, when you think about advocates that what maybe they could either be doing more of or thinking differently about?
I see a lot of advocates. Specifically in, LA, a lot of people do charities, and then, this is this beauty convention, and, 20% goes to breast cancer, yay. And don't get me wrong, writing a check is certainly a great thing that you can do, if that's where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, okay, where's the money going to? What's going on? What specific aspect of breast cancer? How does this affect children and young people specifically? Because that's what I care about, Mm-hmm. So just not actually talking about where their money's going and how to make an impact, I think is really important. And, that's why I'm so visible online, like my Instagram account. At first I had one just for my blog, and now in my personal one, which has a lot of comedy and acting stuff, but I talk about death on there too. And all the time, I tell people, yeah, and I blog about death. People are like, what? That's so weird. But I think if you just make things normal, it becomes more normal for other people, and it's made it so it's more approachable for like teenage girls to reach out to me. They're like, oh, I saw you talk about this, so can I ask questions about this? I'm like, yeah, of course. So just like going for it, talking about it all.
That piece too, I think, is so important. When you put something out there, mm-hmm. it opens the door for someone who may not otherwise want to voice something to know, oh, here's a safe place I can go to say something. Mm-hmm. I posted something in May about living with depression and navigating that. And that's something I haven't been particularly interested in talking about, but I was like, oh, that's the problem, is that like no one wants to talk about depression, least of all depressed people. Right. But if we don't talk about it, then it gets shut behind doors and we start the problems. Mm-hmm. And the number of people who reached out just to say like, hey, thank you, I really appreciate that. Sometimes sharing like, I'm experiencing this, sometimes not, but it's like, I haven't heard from you in 10 years. Like right. This post you're responding to with a thank you for a reason. So if you're willing to put yourself out there in those ways, because that's the other side of the coin too, mm-hmm. is that disclosure is a real thing. And employment in the world is a real thing, and perception is a real thing. You have to be willing to there's a reason people say, oh, that's courageous. There is a reason, because you are going to get some kind of blowback that you'll have to deal with. If you're willing to take that on, the way you can change someone's life is extraordinary. So I applaud your courage.
Well, thanks. And I just wanted to add real quick.
Please.
I was thinking about this community in terms of where I fit in, and I think like what I most closely relate to is caretakers and caregivers and the sibling who's perhaps not affected directly. And I think it's so important for those people to take time from themselves and acknowledge that, there's so much that you're going through, and, you can feel guilty, I think, if you're not the one who's sick, that, you should just be like happy for, and I have so much respect, for what you're doing. And, I think about my mom, it's like, oh, well, breast cancer was not as big of a deal as ALS. So everyone would ask about him because he looked like, oh, that looks weird that you're lying in a bed connected to oxygen tubes with 3 nurses behind you at all times. Like a lot of people have illnesses, as you guys know, that don't look specifically
the invisible diseases or the invisible conditions.
Yeah. So just doing something nice for yourself, whether that is seeing a therapist for the first time, even if you're 60 years old. Like my mom, I'm like, hey, have you ever been to therapy? She's like, I don't know. Like, I don't want to take up too much time. I don't know what I'd talk about. I'm like, Mom, you could talk about a lot of things, but a lot of people just don't grow up that way. So I'm
Sure.
like, therapy, life coaching, having that friend to talk to about what you're going through is so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And David, for you, things that advocates could be doing differently or thinking differently about?
Our financial health. Going from 18 to 19, every hospital bill I'd run up in the last 5 years got put on my credit bureau. So that's what no one seems to bother with.
And are there any specifics that you think at 18, 19 in those ages, young adulthood, specific tips that you may have for people?
Well, yeah, I fix people's credit for a living, but when you're that young, it's just easy to, oh yeah, free credit card, cool. 6 months, no pay, don't have to pay back. All kids do that. But what I'm talking about is trying to stop a hospital from dinging you. You have to communicate with the hospital before you go in, mind you, and after. But now there's some law firms running around the country that all they do is sue people that owe money. They get what's called a summary judgment, and you're beat. If you want your taxes, you're not going to see those. Any financial help that you get from the government is not going to happen. Teaching these kids how to communicate with the finance department of the hospital, that would just change the world like night and day.
How important, we'll start with you, Chelsea, how important is it to have that kind of a tone when you're dealing with somebody whose illness is rather significant?
It is very important to set that tone. You are a rock star from how to me, you sound like you have it all figured out, and I'm sure you've gone through a lot. My mother, and we're okay to talk about this at this point because we've come a long way. She knows I do this, but she was stressed out. It was not a calm place to be for a lot of the days. And, there's a lot of reasons for that. And, I can't even imagine, right? You're getting chemo, and then your husband's like falling down the stairs and all this stuff. So I just think that's kind of what I said before. Anything you can do for yourself. The cliche things they work for a reason. Meditation, there's an app called Calm, free meditations. You can take 10 minutes to yourself in the morning. Anything that person can do to set the stage and let the kids know, we're a normal family, it's going to be okay. I think it's important. So anything you can do to take care of yourself, I think is great.
Yeah, and whenever you can do it. It's always a great time to take care of yourself.
It feels selfish, but it's not.
I know.
It's
I'm not
self-care.
good at that. I'm not very good at that. And that's something that my wife's helped me with a lot is what it means to slow down for reasons other than going to the bathroom. You're allowed to just sit here and look at a tree and think a thought. I think George Carlin used to have a great joke about kids used to just play with this, go outside, play with a stick and stare at the tree. And that was an activity. And now we have to have everything structured. We have to have kickball followed by t-ball, followed by ballet, followed by, he's like, whatever happened to just standing around holding a stick? Then someday someone will hold a stick, they'll fall over, somebody will sue somebody else, and it'll be goodbye holding a stick. And it's yeah, it's true. We don't allow ourselves just the opportunity to kind of be often enough and process and think. You're talking about cycling is the opportunity, and I have to fight for those opportunities myself because I'm not good enough about self-care as much as I talk about it, which,
Because no one teaches you that either. It seems selfish. It's the beauty industry is and there's fashion industry. I don't know. I associate all that with, it was just selfish.
Skincare, and it's L'Oreal, and it's all just very glamorized. And
you can give yourself a facial with agave honey by yourself for free, and it's
not a $50 event.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's a care industry that sometimes maybe complicates things a little when it comes to the kind of care that we're discussing.
Agree. And you said, I think that's amazing that you found that activity. You said your 20s bicycling. It's amazing.
As bad as you might think your situation is, somebody has it worse. And my Tyler, who has muscular dystrophy, is a perfect example. I do everything for him, and I pick his nose, I help him go to the bathroom, I do everything, or somebody does. And he said, Mom, if somebody asked me if I would change my life, I wouldn't change one thing. he said he knows God is using him to change people in the world, and he's okay with that. And he said he loves his life, and that why sit and complain about something when you can't change it? So our parenting style has given him the ability to think like that, and his thinking like that has given me every ounce of strength that I have. So it's kind of a circle. You give it to them, and they give it back, and that's what'll get you through. And I agree with finding something to take care of yourself. You need time, whatever it is. Go for a walk. I used to be a runner. I just had my second hip replaced, so my free time is I go to the gym. I might walk around, I might do the treadmill, whatever, but that's my time to think, and I re-energize myself to come back home to deal with whatever's going on in the house. So you do have to take care of yourself.
It may not be the gym for everybody. It might be a pottery class. It might be I go learn how to make sushi. It might be anything. Just find what it is for you.
Absolutely, 100%.
It can be a little work to find that thing. And David, I know it didn't play into your story in the same way, but I'm sure you can appreciate the point being made about an individual setting a tone for a family, and someone who's maybe in the most compromised position of all setting the philosophy for how we're going to approach this. Is that something that you can speak to as well?
I have to get a liver transplant, and I had to tell my son, I screwed up, my liver's in worse shape today than it was, 2 weeks ago, and I have to get this done. And he said, Dad, you've been in pain your entire life. You deserve it to get, a new liver so you don't have to have this anymore. Yeah. And so, I think I did an okay job. Kept them informed about what was going on, but did not keep them, I hurt here or I hurt there, or let me use you as a crutch. I tried to avoid that so that they, felt like they had a normal parent.
Sure. Okay, so with that, I want to say thank you to the three of you for being willing to share so openly. As we talked about earlier, sharing openly allows other people to resonate with an experience, feel comfortable to find an ally. If you don't share openly, that doesn't happen. So thank you for that. Thank you to NCHS for continuing to support this program, these conversations. And with that, I will again say thank you. Thank you to Bridget and Gateway for having us, and I'll turn the microphone back over to you, Bridget.
To watch videos or listen to podcasts from any of our previous Powering Throughs, visit poweringthrough.org. To learn more about NCHS, visit nchswecare.com.